us all together. Lord, we gather in your name as children of a sovereign God. Forever we proclaim, to God be all glory.
Well, good morning. It's Sunday, February the 15th, 2026. Welcome to episode 596 of The Thinking Theologian as we continue our journey through the scriptures. So today we are, today we're at episode 596. The reading of today is Leviticus chapter 8 through 10. The title of today is Strange Fire. The focal scripture is in Leviticus chapter 10, verse 1, and this is what it says. It says, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his own firepan, put fire in it, placed incense on it, and presented an authorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them to do. And I stole this strange fire title from something John MacArthur did, a conference he did. So I did not come up with this on my own. Now, different old context to how he used it, but just wanted you to know that. Give credit where credit's due. So being in ministry comes with certain expectations. The job is not complicated, but it can be very difficult and very demanding. So like what we're called to do is not complicated. We know what we're supposed to do. But in the midst of that, even though it's not complicated, the actual doing of it can be difficult and very demanding on a person. The Bible tells us we are expected to live, lead, and teach. That's what we're called to do as ministers of the gospel. The problem that I've seen in my time in ministry are people who claim to be called but have no heart to honor the Lord. For instance, I've been around pastors who have openly said they don't like to preach. It is just something that they know they have to do for their position. I have also seen people who do not model a life of obedience or prayer. Then they wonder why the church struggles to reach people. I've also seen ministers who believe that activities and being busy are a sign of a health. I actually heard one pastor say one time that the church isn't busy, they get themselves in trouble. And I think he was trying to be a positive turn on that, but it was said with a condensation there that he wanted to keep the people busy so they would quit seeing really what he was doing because he wasn't doing much of anything. In today's reading, we see what happens when the priests of God violate the standard that has been set for them as leaders. Aaron's sons knew how to set up an offering. They knew it and they saw it. And this is who we're talking about today is Aaron's sons. They knew what was expected from them as leaders. However, instead of following the Lord's direction, they chose to burn a fire for the offering that was not allowed. They decided to do things their way. This choice led to their death. Their disregard for the Lord's directions had to be dealt with. The strange fire they created was a violation of God's standard for offerings. And it could not be tolerated. It had to be, even though they were priests, they violated what needed to get done. And these priests were held to account. And so how does this apply to our current context? I want to acknowledge that the Bible doesn't give exact ways on how to do pastoral ministry, but it does give guidelines. A pastor is expected to meet the biblical qualifications. He's to be a man above reproach. He should be able to preach. He can't be an angry person. They also have to be a person who genuinely loves others. The pastor must be willing to train and lead others to a deeper faith. That is their main job. Gossip is not allowed, and being a person who loves power and control is a disqualification. And so if you're around a pastor who talks about other people, they shouldn't be in ministry, period, end of conversation. That's how serious we need to take it. If they're a person who wants power or loves power, they shouldn't be in that position because being a pastor is about serving. It's not about being a man in control or making all the decisions. We've turned church work into business models, and that's untrue. They believe that business model leadership is the right way. So I bring this up because too many churches and ministries have people in leadership who are bringing their own strange fire to the worship gathering. I was once on staff with an individual who would routinely be angry about everything. I mean, all the time. It was always something. They had a reputation for being extremely rude to anyone who disagreed with them about life or ministry. I once witnessed this person speak to someone publicly at a restaurant in one of the most demeaning and disrespectful ways I've ever seen. I was embarrassed for the position and the fact he represented the office of pastor. And so we were out at lunch. He started peppering this person with questions, and he did not do it in a respectful way. He was doing it on purpose. And even later on in the vehicle, she was even almost bragging about how he talked to the person and what he did. But what he didn't realize is that everybody that was there at the table, was probably about 10 or 11 of us, seen and witnessed what was taking place. And he actually got a very bad reputation for that, and completely just ruined his reputation, and actually the reputation of the church, because of his demeanor and what he did. And he did that all the time. And so that person has that type of demeanor. And so he's disqualified. He thought that was an act of worship, doing what he was doing. He thought he was right, and he wasn't. And if you disagreed with him, it got worse. And so I tell a story because one day that person and church will give an account for not following the standard the Lord has set for ministry leaders. That person did many things that was wrong that they were going to give an account for. And the church that they were at will also have to give an account for allowing it to happen and not holding them to account. That church actually hid many things and still hides things of things they've done that the church has been made aware of. And so there has to be a standard for ministry leaders, and that person didn't have any, and that church didn't have any for the position. They've decided to follow their own standard, which is what the Aaron's sons did here. They did their own thing, and there's consequences for it. So I challenge you to make sure that your leaders are following biblical principles and following what the Lord commands them to do. For instance, if you're not a person who wants to preach, then you shouldn't be a preacher, shouldn't be a pastor, because it's part of what we're called to do. And so I challenge you to make sure your leaders are following biblical principles. Why? Because leaders of churches should be held accountable for how they teach, speak, act, and treat others. If they are not, it diminishes the position. It stains the calling. It's an embarrassment, and it needs to be dealt with. Just like these men were dealt with because they violated the offering standard, so it is with ministers in our context. Will be held account for how they act and what they do. And we got to quit hiding things, and we got to start bringing these things to light. Mike Winger just did something earlier a couple of weeks ago where he exposed somebody in the 6-hour podcast to what's going on. And this needs to happen more, not less. It needs to happen more. We need to call out issues and quit allowing churches and individuals to hide things that are going on. I've actually struggled with whether or not to expose a person that I'm familiar with that consistently and constantly does things, has done things that are an embarrassment. The way they talked about church members, the way they talked about the church, the way they handle things, the way they spoke in meetings, the language they used, just everything. It was an embarrassment. People knew about these things, and these things were hidden up. And I've been struggling with, should I expose that in a more public way? And I answer that question is, I don't know. So that's something I'm still working through and still working with. I want to trust God to deal with it, but then also at the same time, there are many people who believe one thing that isn't true. And so any disobedience, excuse me, sorry. And so I say all that because we can't stay in the calling. Those people must be held to account. So any disobedience to the Lord's direction will be dealt with, and it will be dealt with severely. Strange fire is a lesson that everyone must pay very close attention to when leading worship. Everyone. Me as an individual, if I try to bring strange fire to worship, I need to be held account, and churches need to hold people account for this same truth. And so I hope you understand my heart behind this. This is not to be a negative podcast today, but it's also something that has to be dealt with, because if it's not dealt with, we allow these things to go. And I understand, and I'm guilty of this too. In my attempt, even when I resigned from the church I was at, my attempt to protect people, I believe that sometimes I did more harm by not exposing the truth when I left, because I thought other people would, and they didn't. And so now there are many people who believe one thing that is untrue, and not know the reality of what really happened. And so that's where I believe I was wrong in how I handled that situation. Not saying that was I was completely wrong in it, because I believe I was doing the right thing in the moment. And now looking at it, I probably should have exposed in a very public platform, like, this is what's going on, this is what happened, and this is what this person's done, and here, y'all need to deal with it. Because if not, it's going to continue. And now because I would expose it to leadership, they're just going to cover it, and now that person is going to adjust how they act behind closed doors so it can't be seen, but their attitude still hasn't changed. And that's the problem, because ministers are held to a higher standard, and we must start doing it. We must. We can't keep doing what we're doing. So that's the main takeaway. Make sure that your leaders are not bringing strange fire to worship, and we hold them into account, because God will. And I think we need to do our part to do that here while we're here in our churches and in our settings. So tomorrow we'll be in Leviticus chapter 11 through 13. Have a good day, and I will see you then.